They arrived less than 2 days after I moved in, clipboards in hand, sunglasses hiding their eyes. One of them smiled like they already owned the place. "You'll have to give up the dock. It's part of the HOA now." I hadn't even unpacked yet. No knock on the door, no explanation, just a blunt statement as if it were a foregone conclusion I'd accept. I kept my mouth shut, nodded like someone who didn't mind losing something. But you'd be amazed at what people overlook when they think they're holding all the cards. What happened next still makes my phone light up with messages. "Got a theory? Leave it below. I'd love to know what you think is coming." For 2 years, I'd imagined this exact moment, standing on my own lakefront property at 42 years old, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise turn the water into molten gold. After years of saving from my county job in water management, I finally had my slice of heaven. The house itself wasn't much yet, but the dock of 30 feet of solid wood stretching into the lake was everything. It needed work. The last owner had let it go, but it was well built, of pressure-treated lumber, sturdy pilings driven deep. It just needed care. My first week there was pure joy. Every evening after work, I'd change into old clothes, grab my toolbox, and head out to the dock. I sanded away years of weather damage, primed every inch, and painted it a gorgeous ocean blue that reminded me of vacation trips. Loose railings were replaced, bolts tightened, and I even added LED lights along the edges for a soft glow at night. I could see it already. Quiet coffee mornings, peaceful afternoons fishing, maybe reading a book while the water lapped at the pilings. This was why I'd worked so hard for peace, quiet, and a place entirely my own. One morning, I was sitting there with my coffee when I heard heels crunching over dry leaves. Turning around, I saw a tall blonde woman, maybe around 50, striding toward me with purpose. She was dressed like she'd stepped out of a home and garden spree. A pink cardigan, black slacks, not a hair out of place. In one hand, she carried a wicker basket that smelled of fresh muffins. She seemed pleasant enough, but the way her eyes flicked from me to the dock and back felt a broken bar calculated. Like she was sizing me up. "Hello there," she called in a sing-song tone meant to sound friendly. "I'm Celeste Morrison, HOA president for our lovely neighborhood." "Welcome." She offered a handshake, her smile wide but empty. I wiped paint from my hands and shook her. "So first impressions matter when you're the new guy." She complimented the house, asked about my move, offered me a muffin. Standard neighborly chatter until she glanced at the dock and said something that froze my blood. "This community dock looks incredible after your repairs." "Community dock?" I blinked at her, sure I'd misheard. My grip tightened around my mug. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" "This is my private dock, on my property." I spoke slowly, as if clarifying for someone who might not understand. She chuckled, as though I'd made a ridiculous joke. "Oh, no, that's not right," she said in a patronizing tone. "According to HOA rules, all waterfront structures are community property. It keeps things fair and consistent." She pulled a photocopied sheet from her purse, a single sentence highlighted in yellow. "All waterfront amenities shall maintain community access for aesthetic and equity purposes." I stared at it, stunned. Maybe there'd been some mix-up in the paperwork. Maybe my realtor had missed something. I hadn't scrutinized every page of the HOA documents. I'd been too focused on the purchase itself. "I'll need to check my purchase records and HOA rules," I told her, keeping my voice even. There might be some confusion. That's when her expression shifted. The neighborly act vanished. Her smile became stiff, politician-like. "I certainly hope there's no confusion, Mr. Johnson," she said, stressing my name like it tasted sour. "We have an HOA meeting this Wednesday at 7 p.m. sharp. The dock issue will be the main topic and I strongly suggest you attend." Her suggestion wasn't really a suggestion. As she left, she kept glancing at the dock, and not with admiration, but with the appraising look of someone eyeing property they planned to take. I heard her mutter about it being perfect for book club tea parties. Book club tea party on the dock. I just restored with my own hands and money. For the first time since moving in, a cold knot formed in my stomach. Her eyes had that knowing glint, like she was already a step ahead. I should have walked away, but then she said 5 words that made it clear this wasn't over. "That dock isn't yours anymore." If I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. The very next morning, an envelope was taped to my door, whole letterhead, Celeste's elegant signature, and a violation notice. Grass height exceeds community standard of 2 inches. Fine, $25. I measured it myself at 2¼ inches. I'd come from an apartment where I never even owned a mower, and apparently I was already failing in the HOA's eyes. It didn't stop there. By Tuesday, another letter arrived. Garbage bin left at curb 15 minutes past collection time. Fine, $50. 15 minutes. I'd been on a work call and missed the garbage truck by 15 minutes. That quarter hour cost me $50. The next day's mail delivered the third strike, a fine for $75 because my mailbox wasn't an approved color. Mine was plain black, the kind you see everywhere. Apparently, only forest green, navy blue, or burgundy passed muster here. I never imagined mailbox paint was something anyone would regulate. Every letter had that same delicate, looping signature at the bottom. By then, I was starting to realize that Celeste Morrison treated her HOA presidency like a full-time job with a personal vendetta attached. The violations kept rolling in, each more absurd than the last. My doormat, wrong shade of brown. My newspaper, sat on the driveway 12 minutes too long after delivery. Even the way I parked my car in my own driveway allegedly violated some obscure rule requiring vehicles to be perfectly parallel to the house. It was as if someone was timing my every move, measuring grass with rulers and tracking me with a stopwatch. Every morning brought a new fine, a fresh accusation, and a reminder that I was somehow wrecking neighborhood harmony. When Wednesday evening came, I walked into the community center expecting a rational conversation about property rights. What I found instead was a staged trial, with my doc in the role of the accused. The cramped meeting room was built for 15 people but crammed with 23, all staring at me like I just committed an unforgivable offense. Celeste presided from the head table with a neat stack of official papers, flanked by 2 silent board members who couldn't meet my eyes. The whole thing had the air of an ambush they'd been planning long before I'd ever arrived. "The issue before us tonight," Celeste began, her voice full of manufactured gravitas, "concerns the new residents' refusal to allow community access to our shared waterfront amenity." Shared waterfront amenity. I'd owned the property for 3 weeks, and suddenly my dock was theirs. She held up what looked like development blueprints, pointing to my lot with a red laser pointer. "As you can see, the original plans clearly mark this structure for community use." From where I sat, the drawings were too small to verify, but the crowd nodded along like she'd just revealed sacred truth. I raised my hand to speak, but she waved me off. "We'll hear from affected residents first." One by one, neighbors lined up to air their grievances. Mrs. Patterson scolded me for painting the dock without approval. The Hendersons complained I'd added lighting without going through the Architectural Review Board. A man I'd never seen claimed I'd blocked fishing spots families had used for generations. The list went on, like they were reading from a prepared script. After 20 minutes of this, Celeste finally gave me the floor. I stood and kept my voice steady. "I bought this property specifically because it included a private dock. My deed shows the waterfront is part of my lot. I've invested my own time and money into improvements, and I haven't restricted access to anything except what's legally mine." The room buzzed with whispers and head shaking, as if I'd admitted to burning down the clubhouse. "We've always accessed the lake here," Celeste shot back, her tone now openly hostile. "Putting up ropes doesn't change that." Ropes? I hadn't put up any ropes, but clearly, that was the next narrative in this little play. "Furthermore," she added, "our Architectural Review Committee never approved your modifications. All exterior changes require advance written permission." Advance written permission to paint my own dock. The absurdity was starting to feel like a bad dream. What followed was a masterclass in groupthink. Resident after resident waxed poetic about decades of tradition, shared values, and community resources that supposedly outweighed private ownership. They reminisced about summer barbecues, teaching kids to fish, and family gatherings on my dock, which they now spoke of like it was a public landmark. The vote was a foregone conclusion. 18 voted to send me a formal violation notice ordering me to restore community access within 7 days. 3 abstained, likely too afraid to choose sides. 2 voted against. 1 was an older man who'd shaken his head through the entire meeting. That same man tapped my shoulder on the way out. "You're not the first they've pushed out," he whispered before walking away. leaving me with more questions than answers. Driving home through the quiet streets, I replayed the meeting. These people acted like I'd stolen something sacred, but their outrage was too organized, too synchronized to be spontaneous. Someone had coordinated Thesa, and I was starting to think Celeste wasn't the real puppet master. When I reached my porch, another envelope was waiting, taped to the door. This time it wasn't on the whole letterhead. It came from the law firm Anderson and Associates in the next town over. The paper inside felt heavier, more official, and far more dangerous. It was a demand letter. The HOA required me to remove my fence and restore community access to the waterfront amenity within 7 days or face a lawsuit that would cost more than I'd paid for the house. The numbers were intimidating. Legal fees starting at $15,000, court costs between $3,000 and $5,000, plus up to $10,000 in punitive damages for community disruption. I sat at my kitchen table, reading it over and over, trying to process the fact that enjoying my own dock could cost me $40,000. For the first time since this battle began, I felt genuine unease, not because of the money. Deep down, I knew I was in the right, but because of the sheer unfairness of it all. There was a moment when I actually considered surrendering. Maybe it would be easier to let them have their way, sell the place, and find somewhere else. Somewhere owning private property didn't feel like a criminal act. The reality was, the legal system tends to favor those with deep pockets and endless time to spend in court. I was just one man trying to enjoy the home I'd worked 15 years to afford. But then I glanced out the window at my dock. The bright ocean blue boards gleamed in the sunlight, stretching into the sparkling water, and I knew I wasn't about to hand it over to bullies. The next morning, I spotted them right away at 2 new posts driven into the lakebed, about 10 feet from my dock. They'd been professionally installed, complete with little surveyor flags and official-looking tags. They weren't there the night before. Someone had been working on my property under cover of darkness. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was trespassing. And judging by the quality of the work, whoever did it had money to burn on professional surveying. A slow, burning anger rose in me. Nobody had permission to touch my dock or anything around it. I waded into the shallow water to get a closer look, and what I found made my anger go cold. At the base of each post was a small white sticker with a surveyor's code, but it wasn't from the state or county. This was a private surveying firm, the kind developers hire when they're planning something big. Someone was taking measurements for construction without my consent, which meant they believed they had the legal authority to do whatever they wanted here. The fluttering flags looked like little battle standards planted on my land. I photographed every inch of the intrusion, angles, tags, placement, gathering evidence with the same thoroughness I'd used in my years of fighting bureaucratic red tape. They'd just handed me proof of trespassing that would stand in court. Across the inlet, I noticed movement. A man in a fleece vest stood on the opposite bank, sunglasses hiding his eyes, a clipboard in his hands. He didn't move. He just watched, still and deliberate. This wasn't some early morning jogger who'd stopped to see what was going on. He was studying me, noting my reaction to their little midnight operation. I had a feeling I'd be seeing him again, and our first conversation wouldn't be as polite as my talks with Celeste. Back inside, I called the number on Celeste's business card, ready to demand an explanation. She picked up on the second ring, her voice as fake friendly as ever. "Good morning, Mark. I was expecting your call," she said. Expecting it? That meant she already knew about the posts. Before I could speak, she offered her own explanation. "Those surveyor markers were installed by our consulting engineering firm. We need accurate boundaries before moving forward with community improvements." "Community improvements? On my land? Without my permission?" My voice sharpened. "Those posts are on my property. That's trespassing. I want them gone now." She sighed, as though I was being unreasonable. "They're temporary, just for measurements. The engineering team needs them in place to design the new community access structures." "Access structures?" "I'm not authorizing anything to be built on my waterfront," I said, pronouncing each word with precision. "This is private property. I do not consent to construction of any kind." The conversation spiraled downward fast. Her tone turned icy, accusing me of being selfish, of depriving longtime residents of lake access, even of robbing children of the chance to learn to swim. In her twisted logic, Using my own dock was equivalent to destroying decades of community tradition. That night, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter, certified mail, signature required, demanding the immediate removal of all unauthorized structures. I copied the county assessor's office and the sheriff's department for good measure. If they wanted to push this into a property rights battle, I was ready to fight with the law on my side. The very next morning, my mailbox had been tampered with. Nothing was missing, but the lock was scratched and jimmied, like someone had been inside. It felt more personal than theft. A warning. I'd gone up against developers who wanted to drain wetlands for malls, city lawyers trying to rezone conservation areas for their political buddies, and union bosses who thought environmental laws were optional. But this felt like war, and they'd just made the first open strike. Friday afternoon, while mowing my lawn and measuring it to comply with their sacred 2-inch rule, an older man walked up the street toward me, bald, mid-60s, dressed in a navy polo that screamed retired corporate manager. His smile was friendly, but his eyes had the calculating gleam of a salesman sizing up a mark. "Hello there," he called as he got closer. "I'm Gary Wells, HOA Vice President. I hear you're having some broken bar difficulties with our community standards." The way he said difficulties made my teeth clench. "I wouldn't call them difficulties," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "More like learning the ropes." Gary nodded as if that was exactly what he'd hoped to hear. Then he launched into a speech about how the neighborhood had thrived under its rules for 20 years, how it had created a harmonious environment, and how they intended to keep it that way. But the whole time he spoke, his gaze kept drifting toward my dock, and not with anger or disapproval, but with something else entirely. Gary's gaze lingered on my dock with a hungry sort of fascination, the kind you might see on someone eyeing the last slice of cake at a party. As he flipped through a binder, I caught a glimpse of a familiar seal. His company had filed the original dock easement 5 years earlier, a glaring conflict of interest if I'd ever seen one. The violation notices kept coming. Now my dock was too visible, the wood was non-compliant, my roofline was too dominant. By the 5th one, it was clear these weren't rules being enforced, they were weapons being aimed directly at me. That Sunday, I finally understood what Gary meant by guidance. I came home from the store to find a family of 3 sprawled out on my dock as if it were a public park. A folding table, beach chairs, Bluetooth speaker blasting music across the lake. Empty beer cans lined the railing I had just painted, chip bags were scattered on the boards, and one of their kids was swinging from my dock lights like they were playground bars. I stood there for a moment, stunned. I didn't know these people. I'd never invited them. "Excuse me," I said as I walked over, keeping my voice steady despite my rising blood pressure. "This is private property. I didn't give anyone permission to use it." The man in mid-30s barely glanced up from his sandwich. "Celeste said we could use the community dock," he replied, like I was the one out of line. "She told us every resident has the right to enjoy the waterfront amenities." Every resident's right. I'd spent a week of my own time and money restoring this dock, and now anyone could just waltz up and use it? Celeste said that. My hands clenched at my sides. That particular heat of anger, the kind that comes when someone is taking advantage of your hard work, arose in my chest. "So, I fix it up, and now the whole neighborhood gets free access whenever they feel like it?" I asked. The woman, lounging with a book, looked up with mild irritation. "Don't you believe in sharing?" she asked. "We've lived here for years. It's only fair longtime residents enjoy improvements to community property." Fair. I wanted to ask her if it was fair that I'd paid for the house specifically because of the dock, but I already knew how that conversation would go. When they finally left the trash still littering the boards, I made up my mind. Monday after work, I drove straight to the hardware store and bought a small iron gate with a lock, plus a bold private property and no trespassing sign. If the HOA wanted a fight, they'd get one. By Tuesday night, the gate was in place, firmly within my property line. Each bolt I tightened felt like a small, personal victory. I was just finishing when Gary appeared again, silent and sudden, like he'd been waiting for the right moment. This time, no neighborly grin, just a flat, cold expression. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. "Protecting my property," I replied, not even looking up from the lock. He circled the gate slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning every inch like he was appraising it for purchase. "Finest dock in the neighborhood," he murmured, almost to himself. "Perfect location, excellent view." Then his eyes met mine, sharp, calculating. Some people know how to appreciate beautiful things, others a broken bar don't deserve them. There was something in his tone that told me this wasn't about HOA rules anymore, it was personal. "I've been here since there were only 10 houses, he went on. "I've seen all kinds of people move in, worthy people, and unworthy people." His gaze shifted deliberately toward my home, and I didn't need him to spell out which category he thought I belonged to. Before I could say anything, he turned and walked away, leaving me in the fading light, wondering what kind of war 1D stumbled into. The next morning brought the answer, or at least a part of it. An email from Celeste landed in my inbox. "Unauthorized construction violation. Remove structure within 24 hours or the HOA will take stronger measures." I read the line 3 times, wondering what stronger measures meant. When I glanced out my kitchen window, there was Gary, standing on the sidewalk, staring directly at my house. No attempt to hide it, just a clear, deliberate message: "We're watching you." That's when I understood this wasn't just about enforcing rules. They wanted me gone. Gary wasn't bluffing. And the surveyors were scheduled for tomorrow. When the community center doors opened, the place was packed with more people than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. Not just the regulars, but faces I'd never noticed before. Celeste had promised a final resolution to the dock matter and claimed she now had definitive legal proof. Apparently, that promise was enough to draw a crowd. Gary sat beside her at the head table, his expensive briefcase propped up like a stage prop. He kept leaning over to whisper to her, each time earning a serious nod. The air in the room buzzed with anticipation. Celeste started the meeting with her usual dramatic flair, but her voice carried something new: confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from thinking you've already won. "Fellow residents," she began, "we've had no choice but to take serious action. Mr. Johnson has refused all reasonable attempts at cooperation, and his abstinence has cost this community thousands in legal and consulting fees." I wanted to interrupt, to point out they'd chosen to rack up those fees, but I kept quiet. I needed to hear their angle. The crowd murmured in agreement, some shaking their heads like I'd personally vandalized the neighborhood. "However," Celeste continued, her voice rising, "we have discovered documentation that settles this matter once and for all. This isn't about HOA regulations anymore. This is about a legally binding agreement that predates Mr. Johnson's purchase." She let the silence hang for effect while Gary reached for the briefcase with exaggerated care. The whole room leaned in, and I'll admit I felt a flicker of unease. Gary stood, savoring the moment, and slowly opened the case. From it, he withdrew a yellowed document sealed in a protective plastic sleeve. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a courtroom announcement, "this is an addendum to the original purchase agreement, signed by the first owner of Mr. Johnson's property in 1983, a broken bar." Gary held the paper high, letting it catch the overhead lights like it was some ancient relic. "The original owner," he declared, "explicitly agreed to share dock access with neighboring properties to maintain community harmony." He turned it slowly so the crowd could get a good look. Even from my seat, I could make out the faded-looking handwriting and the neat signature at the bottom. The whole thing had the vibe of something you might find in an antique store if that antique store also sold cheap reproductions. Gary read aloud, his voice gaining momentum with each line. "The previous owner agrees to allow reasonable shared access to the boat dock facility for community use. Understanding this enhances property values for all residents." While he was basking in his performance, I was already cross-referencing Wadena County filings, plat maps, the HOA charter. Something didn't add up. When he finally passed me the document, the problems were glaring. First, the smell. Old paper has a distinct, musty scent that comes from decades of slow decay. This smelled like chemical antique spray from the craft store clearance bin. Then the ink, a modern gel pen ink, too smooth, too bold. In 1983, people were using ballpoints, not pens you could buy in a rainbow pack at the office supply store. The edges of the paper were too crisp as well, machine cut with precision tools that didn't exist for small jobs 40 years ago. And the signature? The pen pressure wavered in a way that screamed traced. Not signed. I didn't call him out outright. Not yet. Interesting document, I said evenly. Given its legal significance in a potential lawsuit, I'm sure the HOA's attorney will want it professionally authenticated before it's used in court. For the briefest moment, Gary's confidence faltered. Authenticated? He repeated, the word coming out just a shade too thin. Of course, I said. It's standard practice via paper dating, ink analysis, handwriting verification. 2 to 3 weeks, maybe $2,000, but worth it for credibility. I also knew something else. His firm had filed easements through a dissolved LLC, and 2 coordinates in their claim landed squarely in state-managed water. That was jurisdiction leverage. And it was mine. The room had gone still, the crowd swiveling between us like spectators at a tennis match. Celeste's confusion looked genuine. If Gary had forged this, she hadn't been in on it. Gary, she said slowly, you didn't mention authentication. Shouldn't we have done that if we planned to use this in legal proceedings? He started to sweat, a literal beads forming along his hairline. Well, the document speaks for itself, he muttered. It's obviously authentic. You can see the aging, the ink, but the certainty was gone from his voice. I pressed. Tell you what, since this could resolve everything, I'll personally pay to have it examined by a certified forensic document expert in the state capitol. We can ship it out tomorrow. The trap was set. That won't be necessary, Gary snapped. He must have realized how bad that sounded because he immediately tried to soften it, but the damage was done. For a moment, I wondered if I was becoming the kind of person I used to prosecute as someone who weaponized paperwork. But then I remembered Celeste's smug smile that first day on my dock. Gary's historic document had just detonated in his hands, and everyone knew it. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Celeste calling for an emergency recess, neighbors whispering and tied knots about forgery and legal liability. But the real blow came outside. Gary caught me in the parking lot, his face twisted with fury. So smart with your little technical analysis, he hissed. You have no idea what you've unleashed. This wasn't about HOA bylaws anymore, it was personal. And that made him dangerous. That night, I planted orange flags along the actual boundary line, installed motion-activated lights along the dock path, and filed 3 injunctions: county, civil, and environmental. The HOA's lakefront picnic was scheduled for the next morning. I'd be there at 9 a.m. with court orders, survey markers, and a drone camera. The fallout spread like gasoline fire. Neighbors started coming forward with stories. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been told to take down a bird feeder because it attracted undesirable wildlife. The young couple who'd been reported for parking in their own driveway. Even Arthur had a catalog of Gary's intimidation tactics, lawsuits, and property disputes going back decades. Celeste, meanwhile, was done. Witnesses told me she'd confronted Gary in the community center parking lot, voice raised to a full scream. You made me look like a fool in front of the entire community. I trusted you, and you used forged papers to drag me into your vendetta. Her humiliation was complete. Gary had lost his most powerful ally, but I wasn't interested in watching him flail. I wanted this over. That weekend, I went to the county planning office, straight to the dusty basement archives where old subdivision records live and die. After hours of digging, I found the needle in the haystack. The original 1982 development agreement between Lakeshore Properties and the County Planning Commission. Buried in the text was the killer clause: the approval for the subdivision had been granted only if the developer deeded a 15-foot wide strip along the entire lakefront to the county for public access and environmental upkeep. That meant no lot in the subdivision actually touched the lake. That strip belonged to the county. Any structure there required county permits. The HOA's beloved community beach was an illegal encroachment, and my dock, the only legal waterfront structure in the neighborhood, built with county approval on county-managed land. When I told Celeste in private, she broke. The stress, the embarrassment, the betrayal. She crumbled, tears streaking mascara down her cheeks. I never wanted any of this, she said. Gary told me you were trying to ruin the community spirit, that you'd destroy property values. He made me believe we had to fight you. That documento he showed me hours before the meeting said the family confirmed it was real. I should have questioned it, but I was afraid of losing face as president. Celeste told me how Gary had slowly tightened his grip on the HOA, leveraging his construction background to play expert on every legal matter, convincing her he understood documents better than anyone else. She hadn't seen that it was never about protecting the neighborhood, it was about his vendetta against me. Armed with that knowledge and the county records in my back pocket, I filed an official report as County Water Management Supervisor. The notice that went out on county letterhead was short, blunt, and devastating. Notice of unlawful encroachment on county property. All structures within the 15-foot easement must be removed within 30 days.